Those who fear music are dangerous.
Welcome to Retro Groove. Enjoy your voyage. Retro Groove. Retro Groove. Retro Groove. Retro
Howdy and welcome to Retro Groove. I'm Adam.
And I'm Liam.
And this is a podcast where we talk about music that stands the test of time. Welcome back. We had a little bit of a break for Christmas. Hope y'all enjoyed our second annual Albums of the Year episode. Had a lot of fun with that. And with the coming off the holidays and some travel, we took a little bit of a break. But we are ready to come out of the gate swinging. Liam, how's it going, sir? What's going on with you?
It's going pretty good.
Sweet.
2023 is shaped up all right so far. Just took in a musical. We took our daughter to see Aladdin.
Oh, okay.
And it was really cool. I have to say, like, I'm still in the same boat with musicals. Like, the production was great, the performance was great, but they added a bunch of songs to carry through the whole thing so that there was
Right.
always some sort of singing going on every 4 minutes.
Of course.
And there were times where I'm like, we don't need a song here. Like, why don't I understand the need for the cadence, but it just and I felt it from my daughter too. Like, it wasn't songs that she was familiar with, and it wasn't anything so strong that I was like, man, I wish this was in the movie. Why did they leave this out? Have you seen the live action Aladdin movie?
The one with Will Smith?
With Will Smith, yeah.
Yes, I've seen
Okay.
the movie. I have not
So-
seen musical version.
Sure. So what I was hoping, and I don't know how everything played out here, but I'm assuming that the Broadway show came before the live action musical. But in the movie, that Jasmine song that was added, Speechless, I think it was, she gets empowered and whatever. Like, it's this amazing moment in the movie where because it wasn't in the cartoon, and
Right.
Jasmine is finding her voice, and she won't be shut down, and she stands up for herself, and it's this beautiful song. And I'm like, oh man, I hope they do this in the musical. That would be so cool. And there is the sentiment there, but the song's not there. And it's these other weird filler songs instead. So ultimately a great experience. It was super fun, but didn't win me over on musicals. We'll have to leave that for something else in the future. I probably should have gone to see Beetlejuice, but I don't think my daughter's ready for that yet. So we went the Disney route. What about you? How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Just trying to get back into the swing of things after this was such a kind of a do nothing post holiday season.
I feel that.
There was a ton of downtime at work, and just kind of spent the whole week not doing very much at all, just kind of trying to rest and put the year behind us.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then it's just, here we are. It's 2023. I'm not ready for it to happen yet. It's like I'm working.
You're hibernating.
Kind of. I'm still in hibernation mode. Work is still ramping up pretty heavily, and I'm just kind of, no, I'm not ready for this yet. And I haven't gotten back into any of my content creation at all yet. This is the first thing that I'm doing since we recorded the last episode.
This is a good way to get into it, because we have good conversation.
This will jumpstart it, and I'll be fine. It's just kind of a little bit of maybe a cocooning season for me, where I'm going to be doing a lot of chilling and playing my guitar, privately and not doing a whole lot else, but I'll get back into the swing of things here.
Well, you should probably, if you want to take a page out of the book of who we're talking about today, it sounds like you need to get yourself a house in Reykjavik.
Iceland. Yeah, there you go. I figured that's where you were going.
And just set yourself aside and find your inspiration there.
That would be awesome. If anyone wants to,
Sponsor,
I don't know,
sponsor
a trip to Iceland,
adopt you.
It's for the good of the show. It really is.
Yeah.
So, my inbox is open.
Yeah.
Whoever.
But if there's ever anyone that can provide some sort of inspiration, he's a good one to talk about,
Yes.
He's I'll say that in kind of doing the normal refresher that we do for conversations like this, it's almost overwhelming, like the different directions that this guy goes in. So,
yes.
Like even if one thing doesn't gel, the next song might. And who knows, like, maybe we come out of this and you're just like, I'm going to go start an Afro funk band.
Heck, I'd be down. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and of course, we're talking about the subject of our discussion today, the one and only Damon Albarn.
Mm-hmm.
Prolific musician and songwriter. And there's just, as an introduction, there's really just too much to talk about. Obviously, probably best known for being the frontman and leading songwriter for both Blur and the Gorillaz. But obviously, Gorillaz without the. There's no the. Although I learned something new today about Gorillaz, which is that their original name was just Gorilla.
Oh, singular.
Without the Z.
Oh.
And I'm like, that doesn't sound right at all.
No.
Can you imagine Gorillaz as just Gorilla?
No, it wouldn't make sense because it's such a, I don't know, it's such a collaborative.
Exactly.
The nature of it is so collaborative that you need a plurality to that name.
That's why it works.
Yeah.
So we'll get into all that, but that was just a fun little snippet there. But I guess let's hop right in. We've got a whole episode here to follow Damon from childhood through today and see what he's all about.
I'm wondering though, like, what I always find interesting in these kind of conversations is, do you have a recollection of your how you just organically came into his music? Like, do you recall when you first heard his stuff, in what context, anything like that?
Yeah, of course. And I think probably, and it's just, I think I probably glossed over it because it's not a particularly interesting introduction story. Like most teenage Americans, I was introduced to Damon through Blur being all over MTV. And
is it song 2 or was it something else?
You know what? I don't even remember if it was song 2 or if it was MOR or Coffee and TV or Beetle Bum or what. No, Coffee and TV was the next record. So it wasn't later, Coffee and TV. So it had to have been, it was probably song 2. Let's be honest.
It was probably song 2. I feel like I remember seeing Girls and Boys, but I don't know if I saw Girls and Boys in the moment or if it was something that I saw later on. Because I definitely wasn't watching MTV or Fuse, or I think it was Much Music at the time. Like, I wasn't watching that in '94, so I'm sure I didn't see it in real time. But I have a distinctive memory of seeing Girls and Boys. I kind of remember the music video for song 2. Song 2 for me, I remember hearing it in FIFA.
Yes.
I think it was on FIFA on Nintendo 64. I mean, dude, that song was everywhere.
It was everywhere, but FIFA is
FIFA and
massive.
And then I also remember years later, I think it was FIFA 03. Let me look on my shelf. FIFA 03, no, FIFA 2002 was the remix of 192000, the Soul Child remix.
Oh, that's right.
Gorillaz, and we loved that song. Like we would restart the game to try to get
just
that
to listen
song to play.
It.
But I also like the music video for Coffee and TV. Do you remember that at all? Like seeing that music video with the milk carton?
Yep, with the milk carton walking around.
I adored that music video.
Love it.
My God. And I was like, this is the same band that does the Woo Hoo song? Like,
yeah, right.
Exactly. And then to be exposed to Gorillaz later and be like, oh, this is also the same guy. This is crazy. How is he doing all of this stuff?
That was a crazy moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, you know, there was some singles off of that. There was Beetlebum. I remember specifically Beetlebum Song 2 and MOR. And there were music
MOR is
videos.
A great song.
For all, it's a rocking song. And my best friend at the time that we played music together, he played bass and I played guitar. He got the CD and he was like, you got to listen to this album. And like, we would like try to learn songs off of it. And it was like, I tried to play MOR and I was like, what is he doing with his guitar? Like I could play it now, but back, you know, I did not know how
it was more elevated than you thought it was. It's like the Beatles. Like there was like those kinds of bands where you hear the song and you're like, I think I could try to do this, and then you try to do it and you're like, oh no, I can't do that.
No, you can't. It's that whole deceptively simple thing, like with Ringo, where it's like, oh, people talk about how great of a drummer Ringo was, and some people scoff and they're like, come on. And then it's like, okay, try to play this song nonstop for however long the song is. And it's like, oh, I can't. What is he doing? Wait, hold on. Like, it's deceptively simple until you like try to work it out. And that I feel like that it kind of permeates a lot of Damon's work through Blur and Gorillaz, where it's like on the surface it sounds very simple, but it's truly not. There's a lot more going on underneath the hood. So
now obviously I've gotten us ahead of ourselves a little bit here, but
a little bit, that's fine.
What I wanted to kind of frame, because I was interested what your history was, is that you and I are punching in different spots, but generally the same area,
right?
To a band who has already established themselves, immensely, and is almost in. I don't want to put it the wrong way, but in terms of how they were initially spun media wise and framed, they're already sunsetting in the quote unquote Brit pop, which we won't go into too much, but Brit pop sense. They're already sunsetting, and Damon's moving on and expanding into and realizing all of these ideas that he's got, and he's being so inventive. And that's when we're learning about it stateside more so. Park Life was the album, and The Great Escape was a massive follow-up. And all of that fell on deaf ears, I feel like, over here stateside.
It really did.
So it's interesting that we're punching in and finding this band on album 5 and 6 and the new projects and everything, and have no knowledge of the amazing kind of build up to all of that.
I didn't even really discover any of that until they had a greatest hits compilation that came out in 2000.
I remember that.
And that's when I really learned about all of the older stuff. There's so much material on that greatest hits, and there was a DVD of all the music videos and all of that, that was popular at the time. I had the Beastie Boys one. It was like all of their music videos from all time. So that just kind of expanded my fandom of them. But let's go
jump back.
Way back.
Yeah.
So Damon's born in 1968 in London. As a kid, he has somewhat of a a little bit of a bohemian upbringing, kind of liberal parents. And as a kid, his parents were listening to blues as well as Indian music and African music. So from a really early age, we start to already see some of these multicultural and world music influences very, very early on. And, he starts learning to play guitar, piano, violin. So he's just like, he's practically popping out the womb.
Yeah. His parents are taking
inclined.
him out to see shows and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which now, as I'm looking at all of this and thinking about it, like I may be making my own gorilla. Like I'm like I've been taking her to concerts here and there, and she's playing all these instruments, and we listen to a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm like, all right, well. Although feel like, didn't you say that one of your daughters made like a Gorillaz playlist that she jams to?
Yeah, my older daughter, she is a Gorillaz fan and has a Gorillaz playlist, and that's more often than not. If I'm like, what do you want to listen to? It'll be Gorillaz. And my younger daughter is really, really wanting to learn how to play guitar. So,
so
I can see it.
Some Gorillaz.
Yeah, a whole team.
I want to dig into that later. Yeah,
for sure.
All right. So then he goes to school and he meets some like-minded friends, right?
Yep. So in secondary school, which would basically be high school to us, he goes to the Stanway School in Essex, where he meets Graham Coxon, guitar player. Mm-hmm. And, so they hit it off. They're friends and they're playing music together. In college, they team up with the drummer, Dave Roundtree, and they start a band called Circus.
Nice.
Great title for
a
Brit pop band in the late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But then Circus doesn't seem to fit, so they changed their name to Seymour.
Oh, much better.
And then Seymour doesn't pan out, so ultimately in 1990 they changed their name one last time to Blur. And they released their first single, She's So High, reaching a lofty 48 on the UK singles chart. Wow. Have you heard She's So High?
No.
So it kind of, and I hate to say it this way, but it kind of sounds like what you would think would be maybe like an Oasis B-side, or like an early Oasis song that didn't quite make the cut for the album.
Okay.
It's just very simple, jangly.
Yeah.
Brit
I mean,
pop.
they're kids, right? They're 21, 22-year-old. They're just, yeah.
Yeah, but they're kind of, they're coming along, they're making waves.
Dude, I mean, like they started a band and they got on the charts. I mean, like that's nothing to snuff at just to start.
So,
right
I'd
there,
be thrilled if I hit number 48 on this
how many
singles
charts
chart.
have you been on? I got 0.
So it's enough to keep them going.
Yeah.
And their next single turns out to be There's No Other Way, which hits number 7 on the UK album charts, or on the There's No Other Way hit number 8 on the UK singles chart, which propelled them forward to record their first album, which that album hit number 7 on the UK album chart. And Damon has even been quoted as saying that the album is quote unquote awful. But that was Leisure, and if you listen to it, you can kind of hear. I don't know if you've listened to it or how much you've listened to it.
A little bit, yeah.
It's just like there's some very early hints here and there of like what they're headed toward, but man, it doesn't sound like Blur.
Yeah, I think
Almost
they're
at all.
also. Yeah, I mean the early genesis of Blur through to, I think, through The Great Escape, they're a little bit at the mercy of the fact of what came before them. They're coming out of this scene in Manchester, or tethered to and pulling inspiration from this scene in Manchester that was called Madchester, and it was like indie music, like indie rave, some house, some psychedelia, and so they're trying to like pull from and capitalize on that without, they're not the Smiths, they're not New Order, it's nothing like that. But trying to put their own stamp on that sound. Again, it's just like any other band at that time, or many other bands at that time in their career, where they're just trying to figure out what their sound is. And so they're pulling from all different kinds of influences and finding a scene.
Trying to find where they fit in.
Yeah, rather than maybe just letting them, like, just writing the music that they want to be writing at that time, I'd say.
And I kind of remember being that age, they may not have really known what they wanted to write.
Right.
There's just like, all this music and all the excitement of the late 80s, early 90s and the scene and everything. And they just, want to be a part of it. I can remember being that age and feeling that way. And, I remember having multiple music projects going on around that age, and none of them sounding anything like each other. But they know they've got something, because the album is in the top 10 and they're touring.
Yeah, they head to the States. Yeah.
They head to the States in 1992, and it was kind of a disaster.
Yeah, definitely a disaster.
Because, American, indie alternate, what those terms hadn't even really been.
No, it was grunge
coined yet.
They rolled into
America.
America.
Wanted grunge.
Yeah, they rolled into America, and they weren't playing. I'm not going to call it Britpop at that point, but like they're playing the origins of what would be what would form the Britpop scene of Suede and Oasis and Pulp. And they come over, and look, Americans are jerks in this sense. Like, people, there's some xenophobia, some oral xenophobia to a lot of music from outside of our borders sometimes, and it wasn't what people were looking for.
No, definitely not. And they're you're spot on. They're especially mean if they're there to see, a band that sounds like Nirvana or Pearl Jam or something like that. And, out comes a song like There's No Other Way. And you're like, what is this? Like,
yeah.
So the band they're pretty depressed on this tour. Drinking a lot, playing drunk because they don't want to be there. They just have to recoup and make the money so they're not, in a massive amount of debt when they get back home. And so, Damon starts listening to the Kinks and just things that remind him of home. And he almost has this reaction to the crowds in America and the music that was popular and what they felt like was being demanded from them or demanded of them from American audiences. And he's like, you know what? We're going to write songs that are so quintessentially British rock and roll
100%
that it's going to piss off all these dumb
Lean
American
lean into it.
grunge rockers. And so they start writing songs in the vein of the Kinks, the Who, the Jam, and you start to kind of hear that Blur sound. To me, listening to that second album, primarily it comes through in Graham's guitar, and he's got this really unique growl to his guitar, and it shines through a lot on this. It's really, I'm surprised that it was produced so hot in the mix on this second album that was released in '93, Modern Life is Rubbish. And if you listen to that album, there's the Who and the Kinks all over that album. It is like 60s British rock worship.
Man,
And
I got to listen to this.
It's fantastic.
I haven't spent much time with that.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful album. And that's when you really start to hear like, okay, this is what Blur sounds like. This is something that we haven't really, influenced by those super well-known, internationally recognized British rock bands, but this is something new. This is a very current interpretation of that type of music. And it came out in May 93, topped out at number 15 on the album charts. Obviously it was a commercial flop in the US despite,
shocker. It was built to be that way. Yeah.
Right, exactly. I mean, but the critics were kind to it, but American audiences didn't want it.
Again, you're thinking that was 93, right? Like it just sonically wasn't there. We wouldn't get there until 95, 96.
Yeah. But I mean, they charted well. They loved the new sound. Damon in particular was really happy with the direction that the band was going in, and just immediately started writing furiously for the next album. Yeah. And that was Parklife. Parklife comes out in 94, debuted at number 1 on the UK album charts.
Smash.
And stayed on the charts for 90 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you look at the cadence here, and it's Modern Life is Rubbish, Parklife, and The Great Escape, like back to back, which wasn't the norm as much. Like you saw this in the 70s where people didn't tour a ton. There was a lot of kind of collaborative work going on, and so you would have artists that put out. I mean, we were talking in the last episode about Stevie Wonder putting out 2 albums in the same year and getting nominated for different albums at the same Grammy Award. It did happen, but this is kind of crazy. Like 93, 94, 95, and all solid. Again, I haven't spent as much time with Modern Life, but Parklife and The Great Escape are fantastic albums. And Parklife is, I mean, massive success, kind of establishes the band as this like pop. I mean, they became pop, right? I mean, Girls and Boys is a pop song.
Absolutely.
Right? Although, just like anything else with Blur, there's a gigantic tongue-in-cheek. There's a lot of taking the piss. There's like a bunch of stuff going on in all of this. It's not just nothing's straightforward with anything that Damon has ever done ever. And yeah, like this album explodes. Again, I didn't find this until years later and went back, and it still held up for me. You know, like I looked back at this and I'm like, this album's fantastic. Like cover to cover, so good. And I can't imagine that. I mean, the band had only formed a few years before that. Coming off of what we just talked about, where they just went to the US, they were in debt, everything seems terrible. Like Modern Life is Rubbish. To become the face of a new movement, so to speak, in pop music. It's got to be such a crazy thing to go through. And again, we're going to keep coming back to this. Damon is not that guy. Like he's genius. He's eclectic and inspired, but he's not the shiny pop star. He's not the one who's gonna just stand out there and soak it up. He's not Paul McCartney in that sense,
right? And I mean, in a similar vein as like Kurt Cobain, he was increasingly uncomfortable. With the level of fame that the band had achieved, and he would suffer panic attacks. So it's that kind of thing where, you know, you just want to play in clubs with your friends and have a successful album and make some money and not have to, you know, work a menial job. And the next thing you know, you're like gearing up for an international tour. It's a lot. I can imagine.
Yeah.
So building off of Parklife success, Damon is writing for the follow-up, results in a much more just, now that they've got, now they have all the money that they want to make the album, and they kind of make their Britpop, Abbey Road, whatever you want to call it. They make their like opus in The Great Escape. It's theatrical. It's almost, you could almost call it a concept album. And once again, enters the UK charts at number 1, 1995, rave reviews. But then something starts to happen in Jolly London. Something is afoot.
I mean,
in the Britpop scene.
Well, it's weird. I really don't want to talk too much about the so to speak battle, because it's obvious that it was just a thing that media glommed onto as a way to sensationalize and kind of typify something.
I'm sure.
They took the fact that the Gallaghers were in a competitive state with Damon. You had these four, but really these two like rising shooting stars in this sound that felt like a movement. And then like, I mean, Damon, I believe, kind of spurred it on by shifting the release of their single to coincide with Oasis.
Of course.
Like they found out that
100% intentional.
Oasis was like Oasis was putting out a song, and he's like, okay, well, fine, then I'll do this. So like he did ask for it a little bit, but I also think that it was completely unnecessary. I also think like, there's definitely things there's times in those albums where you can hear the similarities between them and Oasis.
Absolutely.
But more and more as I listen to it, I hear more Radiohead than I do Oasis half the time, especially as we get towards The Great Escape and into the self-title. Like, I get the Gallagher comparison at that moment when they're both in that space, but Oasis goes in one direction and Blur's already headed somewhere else, Like,
exactly.
I think they just crossed paths at that point. Like, that's the way that I kind of view it, I guess, is like you had The Great Escape and Park Life. You had What's the Story, Morning Glory, and one band went and broke in one direction, and one band went and broke in another direction and created something completely different, And Britpop, for what it's worth, isn't anything. Like, Britpop was a sparkle of a time in the timeline of one type of music in one area of the world, Like it existed for maybe 3 years, so to speak. I guess you could probably say that grunge was the same way. Grunge probably lasted 6 years, right? Like 5 or 6 years, maybe a little more.
It was relatively short-lived. Mm-hmm.
It has they all have echoes, but so does Britpop. If you want to get into it, there's no Coldplay without these bands. So like,
right, exactly,
and we're still listening to them. So
well,
like, some
let's
people
not go that. Some people are.
I'm fine with Coldplay. I like Coldplay. It's fine. It's fine.
You set that up for me to knock it out.
That's okay. That's fine. Yeah. So like, again, like I don't want to get mired down in it too much, because there's so much more to what this band is. If this was the end of the conversation, if this was like, and then he went on and did X, Y, and Z, that was it. But it's like, this was the seed, the massive seed that then sprouts in a million directions and kind of allows him to do everything else. Right.
And 100% right. And whether it was, mostly driven by media or self-inflicted or a combination of all of the above, whatever the case may be, it causes strained relationships within the band. Mm-hmm. And eventually, for better or worse, they want nothing to do with it after a while. They're like, all right, like that was fun, but we need to get away from that.
Because they're not pop stars. These guys don't want to be that.
Exactly. So Graham suggests an overhaul of their sound. It's like there's every magazine cover is Oasis versus Blur, and it's becomes the narrative.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, then what's next? The next album, we're going to do another like Oasis versus Blur shootout and see which. It's like, that's
good for them for realizing it too. There's
Right.
an awareness that comes in, and Damon spot on about it constantly. The awareness that he has on how perspective and image and framing things
Yes.
is the guy is another level. Yeah.
And they end up overhauling their sound basically for a second time. And a lot of it is spurred by Graham being bored as a guitar player with the way things are with British bands, and starts becoming influenced by Pavement and some other American bands that are doing things more creatively with their sound. And so they kind of forge a little bit of a new path that will at least ensure that they're not going to get compared and put next to Oasis in a battle or a boxing ring anymore. They don't want to do that anymore. But they have to get out of London in order to do that. So where do they go? Off to Iceland.
Yeah. That's when he first starts heading over there. I mean, he's been doing stuff in Iceland for 25 years, I guess, now, right? So yeah, that's 97. They head off. And yeah, like, I mean, song 2, we touched on our exposure to it, right? But like, it's the most known Blur song easily worldwide. Do you think they still like playing it? Do you think they still do play it? Like, if you go see Blur now, do they play that song? I don't know if they do. Like, I'd have to go check
I wouldn't
the
imagine
setlist.fm.
so, but
it
I
feels
watched
like a song that they probably don't want to play anymore.
I watched a great video of an interviewer and Graham Coxon, and they had the individual recorded tracks of audio from the song. And
Okay.
so they kind of break the song down track by track. Like, here's the drum track. This is what he was doing. This is the isolated guitar track. And he talks about what he was doing. And he tells the story of how this song came together. And they're basically like, they took a song like that riff, that that is a sped up version of a slower acoustic song that Damon was working on.
Oh.
And they were literally just goofing around in the studio with it and just being like, yeah, let's make like the most obnoxious, dumb, stupid sound possible. And as a joke, they recorded it and literally made it as obnoxious and dumb as they could possibly make it sound. And then they're like, hey guys, let's send it to the record company and tell them this is our new single and just see what they say. Like, they thought that they were just playing a joke.
Yeah.
And the record company's like,
It's a smash.
hell yeah, let's print it. And they're like, no, wait.
We'll make millions. Yeah.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. So this is your album by them, would you say? Or like this is the one that you have the longest standing relationship with?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's a hard comparison to 13.
Yeah, same.
Because they're kind of different, but they're both incredible.
Yeah, I feel like I'm more 13 these days. I mean, so he goes. I'm a sucker for a breakup record. You know, like I just like, even if I don't know that's what I'm walking into, the moment I get there, I'm like, oh boy, here we go, take me away. And No Distance Left to Run on this album is
it's heartbreaking.
Oh God. But Caramel's great. Trailer Park. Obviously, Coffee and TV we talked about. Like, there's a bunch of great stuff. But again, this album is kind of all over the place. You know, like some of the songs are still that kind of heavy, grindy, and some of them have the echoes of the jangly Brit pop, but you know, a little bit more evolved, a little more mature.
I think that's what I like about it is it takes the departure from the self-titled fifth album, and it kind of lets them, like, the self-titled album kind of busted open the floodgates.
Yeah.
And now they're just kind of in the open water, like, oh, we can just do whatever we want now.
Yeah.
Like they were successful. They escaped the bloody water of the feeding frenzy of the Britpop rivalry scene.
Yeah.
And now they're like, oh, we did it. We can just do what we want to do now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's them breaking the gravitational pull of that sort of thing. But it also then, you know, leads to other shatterings that kind of happen from there, because 13 winds up being the last cohesive Blur album for a very long time. You have Think Tank, which comes along after that, but that's at a point when I think each of them, Damon in particular, but also Graham, have kind of done their own thing a bunch.
That was after Graham left the band entirely.
Well, so Gorillaz, you know, we're getting to the first Gorillaz album where Damon's kind of gone off and come up with this concept. But then they start to come back together for Think Tank, and as the early parts are forming, because I think Graham is on one song on Think Tank, but also ultimately, like, they try to get it together for that album, and Graham walks away, and it winds up just being the Damon show. But let's dig into Gorillaz a little bit, because Gorillaz is where my like fandom starts for Damon.
Oh, okay.
And then to realize, oh, I've actually been listening to his music for a while, you know, like I knew who Blur was. I knew some Blur songs. I didn't own Blur albums at that point. But Gorillaz comes out, and, you know, obviously visually it's amazing. Yeah. Like, it's so cool. You don't know what you're watching. It's a cartoon band. The song is infectious. And I mean, Clint Eastwood, right? It's that, like, creepy cemetery vibe, and the characters are just so cool. The lead singer's got no pupils, you know, like, and he's kind of droning on in this, like, lilting way, but it's haunting and beautiful and sad. So years prior to all of this, Damon and this artist, Jamie Hewlett, had met each other. Graham had actually introduced them ages before.
Until Jamie starts dating Graham's ex-girlfriend and causes a whole thing.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, my God. Jesus, always so incestuous.
There's always something.
Yeah, Jesus, rock stars. It's always a tight circuit, right? Like, there's always, like, everybody knows everybody.
Yep.
So somehow they start living together or something, right?
Yeah,
like
so
like
Jamie broke up with Graham's ex-girlfriend, and, you know, obviously then Damon has the falling out with longtime girlfriend, Justine. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to mispronounce the last name. You should do it for me, because
God.
Flishman?
I'm going to go with Frischman. Yeah.
Frischman.
Yeah. I'm going with Frischman.
I'm so sorry, Justine.
The
lead singer of Elastica.
Yeah.
Her and Damon were in a relationship for a very long time. And as you mentioned previously, a lot of the songs on 13 are about that relationship ending. But yeah, him and Jamie, recently broken up, so they moved into an apartment together. The idea for Gorillaz comes along while they're watching MTV together and just kind of commenting on the utter lack of substance, and jokingly just like, we're watching a cartoon play out here. Like these aren't even real people anymore. Like the idea for Gorillaz comes along as you could literally put a cartoon band that's not even real people and put it on MTV and do just as well.
Yeah, I mean, like, I remember Tom Green doing the Bum Bum song, and it was, in its own way, it was the same kind of thing where he's just like, hey, let's do something ridiculous and watch me make it to the top of TRL. You know? Like, I can imagine these guys watching the Backstreet Boys or Simple Plan or whoever it was and just being like, this is nothing. This is just a show. This is not music anymore. We're not celebrating music. No. And I'll say that there's something very redeeming about a well-written pop song, so I'll always go to bat for it.
Right.
However, he's not wrong. It is a show, and he's like, well, we could just make a band. We could just like make this non-existent band. If these guys are going to put on a show, we can put on a show. Why don't you draw the show and I'll write the music for the show, basically.
And for those that don't know, Jamie being a visual artist and a comic strip illustrator, who wrote the Tank Girl comic strip, which then became a very strange movie that I just rewatched again recently and was even weirder than I remember. But what was really interesting about going back and watching Tank Girl is how much of the visual style, particularly of the moments where it kind of flips back and forth between live action and comic strip. Oh, there's so much like that looks like a Gorillaz album artwork, or that looks like a snippet from a Gorillaz music video. Like you can see the early, work that he was doing, and you can see that in the Gorillaz artwork. It's really cool. But yeah, it's a weird ass movie.
Yeah.
Not recommended unless you have a particular taste for very strange 90s nostalgia.
Now at the same time as the Gorillaz thing is happening, and I'm going to lean on you a little bit here because I do want to kind of put in contrast Radiohead a little bit, because when I look at Damon and I look at the collective of Radiohead, but I'm looking at Tom, but like they are definitely more of a collective than just one guy. I do think that benefits them in their calculus, like they're able to bounce ideas off of each other and can kind of cull and sculpt things. And I think here we start to see Damon has this ravenous head full of ideas, constant head full of ideas of his inspirations and his interests and his viewpoints and everything. And I think that he often needs people to form with him, I think, to kind of help figure out what hits the floor and what doesn't. And so you're coming off of OK Computer, Kid A, Amnesiac, right? Like this is the time for Radiohead, if I'm not mistaken.
Pretty much.
And it's this like, you have this basically Brit rock has turned into this sort of elevated art. Like the stuff that's popular that's coming across is that, and then you'll have Muse and Coldplay and Snow Patrol, and I'm looking then over at Damon, and I'm like, he's still in a pop space, right? But he's also thinking about doing this Gorillaz album with Dan the Automator and Kid Koala.
Yes.
Like
Gal the Funky Homo Sapien.
Yeah, like
De La
weird,
Soul.
like off, like deep alt hip hop. I
Which he's
don't
a huge
know.
fan of.
Yeah, but dude, I don't see how that works, and it
I don't know.
does.
He is a huge fan. His daughter, his daughter's name is Missy, named after Missy Elliott.
No way.
Unless the internet is lying, which that could be the case.
Could happen. Yeah.
But
But when you look on paper of what's going on at that time, indie alt hip hop merged with British pop rock sensibility, like alt pop sensibility, does not equal success to me. Like that's not, and granted, who am I? I'm not a visionary. Damon is legitimately a visionary. So shame on me. Yeah. But like, who would think that Dan the Automator and the lead singer of Blur and Del the Funky Homo Sapien would go on to create, like, help launch this this band that has had a 20-year career now.
I mean,
it's insane.
I don't know that he was probably all that concerned about the commercial viability of it when I think it probably just came about as an excuse to work with all these incredible other artists that just
I think you're right.
wouldn't work with Blur.
Yeah.
And it just, they were right. It took off. Absolutely took off.
Well, and so the success of that then in turn kind of goes back to what we were talking about after that, because they return back to trying to do Blur, and Graham's already put out some solo projects.
Yeah, it's good stuff, by the way.
Damon is enjoying the sort of liberty that he gets, the creative freedom that he gets, and the experimentation that he's getting with this new Gorillaz project.
Right.
And the whole thing kind of falls apart. I mean, like, he brings in Fatboy Slim to record with the band in Morocco, I think it is.
Yeah, just kind of weird stuff.
and Graham's like, no.
Yeah, it's not what I signed up for.
Exactly. And so you see kind of the at least temporary shattering and ending of Blur at that point. Think Tank comes out. It's a good album. It's just not.
It's fine.
It's not the same Blur as where you felt things were kind of headed.
Right.
You can see they go down the Graham solo and Damon Gorillaz solo paths.
Very much so.
Not to be continued there, but definitely, definitely not. Not the like celebrated continuation of the band that you would hope for at that point.
Right.
But what we do get then is Demon Days.
Yes.
You get such a strong follow-up to their self-titled album, Danger Mouse. I think it's one of the our early exposures to Danger Mouse. Now he's recorded with U2 and the Chili Peppers and the Black Keys and everything. But it was those early, it was Demon Days in Beck. There was a Beck album. Obviously the Grey album is what he was known for, and then you have Gnarls Barkley.
This was his early legitimate work. After stuff like the Grey album that was kind of bootleg.
Yeah, you start hearing about this producer after the fact, and you look back and you're like, oh yeah, he helped produce Demon Days, which is I mean, I'm a big Plastic Beach fan, and I actually really like the Now.
Same.
But Demon Days still holds up. I go back and forth between whether Plastic Beach or Demon Days is my favorite. Demon Days, there's what's it? Every Planet We Reach is Dead. Kids with Guns. Like there's so many
amazing
November
songs.
Has Come. Yeah. It's so eclectic. I don't know. At this point, you're like, I don't even know what Gorillaz is.
Exactly.
It's a band, kind of. I never saw them live. They were trying to figure out how to produce this live. There's a screen sometimes it is Damon.
They've done some crazy stuff with like holographic projections and stuff like that.
Which is what they should do. Like this is an unheard of experimentation vehicle for Damon and his influences and ideas. I'm just going to say, like, you have everybody's hopefully got a friend that is listening to all different kinds of music and is just throwing things at them, and stuff sticks, and that's how you get exposed to new things.
Yeah.
And I wish that Damon Albarn was just curating playlists for me. I wish that he could soundtrack moments of my life, but he kind of does. Like, he's just throughout his career, he's just, if you don't like the song you're listening to, just go to the next one because you might love it. Like, there's always so much there, and you don't know what the next thing is going to sound like. Because, like, Feel Good did kind of sound like Dare a little bit. Like, they both had a solid beat, but I don't know. Like, then you had that song, the spoken word thing with Dennis Hopper, like near the end of the album. Like, who, why would that happen?
Why?
Who does that? Where did that even come from? I don't know, but I love it.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. So Demon Days, I think cemented them as not just a throwaway gimmick, because anything like that where it's just like a cartoon virtual band could just be that, but he pushes it forward, and has, I think it was Dare and Feel Good were both solid hits off that album, like legitimately hits off that album.
And I think so. Feel Good Inc. Dirty Harry
was
too,
was
right?
a single too. Yeah, I don't think that one was super huge, but that was also a single.
Yeah, I remember hearing Dirty Harry on the radio.
Yeah,
and I was like, "Oh, I get it." Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry. This okay? I see what they're doing here.
Yeah.
So, but there's like not a single. I don't skip any tracks on this album.
No,
there's no skipping on that one.
It's cover to cover. And he carries that collaboration, or the start of collaboration that you get on Demon Days, because you do have these features now. You have other people kind of coming into the mix, and he puts together this semi-super group with Paul Simonon of The Clash, Simon Tong of The Verve, and Afrobeat drummer legend, like Fela Kuti, music director for years, Tony Allen, also produced by Danger Mouse. Now, I don't know how familiar you are. So the band is called The Good, the Bad, and the Queen. They put this out in 2007. I don't know. Have you listened to this much?
No.
Or did you listen to it back in the day?
No, actually. I know very little about it, actually.
Okay. So it's good. It's fairly minimalist, and it's pretty bleak. Like, I walk away from it feeling like it's pretty bleak, which is an odd thing to say for two reasons. One, I think that Gorillaz is kind of bleak. Gorillaz,
it's got a post-apocalyptic vibe to
100%. Yeah, it really feels like it. Once you get to Plastic Beach, there's almost a, hey, the world's burning, so let's dance.
Exactly.
There's like it's like it's the end of the world now, and I feel fine. It's like, but Demon Days is haunting still. Like Demon Days is haunting, but it has there's a lot of sort of upbeat moments on there. There's some kind of shine within the darkness there that carries you through it. The Good, the Bad, and the Queen feels kind of bleak, and it's weird because, I mean, you think of The Clash and you think of Tony Allen, like, these are rhythmic guys. These are guys who can drive, who can lift you up, and instead it's all like very toned down. It's very it's not like a dirge, but it just feels kind of sad and stripped.
It's interesting.
It's worth going to, and they'll go and they do another album years later in 2018. It's like an odd departure. It's not surprising because nothing's surprising. Like, he's going to do what he's going to do.
Right.
I wonder, there's got to be more to, I didn't look enough for interviews for context of the time, but like, there's got to be something about what his vision was at that time. Like, whether it was something going on in the world, like I'm trying to think like 06, 07. I don't know what was happening in the UK, but there's something, he was doing a lot of work in Africa. Something, there's a backstory about why the tone is what it is. But it fluctuates a little bit, but
right.
It's an interesting kind of pit stop along the way of what he's doing. And also say it's something that I know you and I aren't super familiar with in general, but just to kind of put a point on the fact that this guy never stops working, and
right.
to back up the prolific mention, he's also working on an opera based on a 16th century work called Journey to the West, like a Chinese work of fiction.
Because of course he is.
Yeah. So that comes out in 2008. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about at that point before we move on to Plastic Beach?
No, I just want to talk about Plastic Beach for the rest.
Yeah. I mean, Plastic Beach is so good.
It's so good.
Yeah. And again, like, he's been very busy, but for me as the listener at that point, there's a 5-year gap because I did not listen to The Good, the Bad, and the Queen. I didn't know what that was.
Right.
Because it wasn't touted as the next project from Damon Albarn. It was just put out there, like I wasn't staying on top of it enough to know. So what I hear is after 5 years, Gorillaz are back, and I hear Stylo, and I lose my
nuts.
freaking mind. Dude, that's still my driving song.
It
I
is.
still will go in and listen to that song.
It's incredible.
Plastic Beach it's a very pop album, almost like toothache inducing on purpose. There are moments on that album that are bananas,
right?
Like,
I mean, from the
super
get-go.
fast jellyfish. Yeah, the Snoop Dogg intro. But yeah, I didn't know who Bobby Womack was, right? And I'm listening to Stylo, and there's this guy just ripping. Plastic Beach, if I'm not mistaken, is really when we start seeing the breadth of what Gorillaz can be when it comes to collaboration.
Yep.
Like, Damon's ideas are various, and he now has the ability, I think he has enough experience in doing it to know how to corral these things into their individual songs. And okay, I'm going to work with Mos Def on this. He brings in Mick Jones. He's already worked with Paul Simonon, and now he's working with Mick Jones. So he's basically, he's got Clash as his house band. The Clash as his house band.
Right.
Yeah. And I would say that also Blur is influenced by the Clash. Like, there's times when you listen to those Blur albums and you can feel the Clash in there. So it's not surprising that it comes right back around. But yeah, you really start to see him working alongside other artists a bunch, and each song on the album bears fruit in its own way from who he's working with.
One of my favorites on that album is Empire Ants with Little Dragon.
With Little Dragon, right?
I love Little Dragon.
Yeah.
And so I can't get enough of that song. There's actually a number of songs that I'll listen to 2 or 3 times, even if I'm doing a whole album listen. And that's always one of them. It's that moment where, like, kind of the quiet intro breaks away and the beat and the synth comes in, and then Little Dragon comes in. It's just nuts. And you're right. There's so many moments like that on this album.
Yeah. I mean, The Clash, Velvet Underground, like you have Lou Reed in there.
Lou Reed.
Snoop Dogg, De La Soul. He starts to develop this sound. I think that this is the touch point where, because if I said to you, what does Gorillaz sound like? I don't think you have an answer. Like,
No,
I don't think
of
any
course
of us know. But there is something to how the synth and the sampling is put together that doesn't exist in his other projects. And I can't put my finger on it. I was trying to like find it and I can't.
Yeah,
I don't know if he could even describe it, but
there's
there
some
are
particular sounds that
Yeah.
You kind of, as a musician, you get attached to, and there's just like there's a craft to it where you're like, okay, this is a Gorillaz sound. And
Right.
so that particular patch on that synthesizer, it's like, okay, this belongs to this project. And then you don't really want to use it for another project.
Except that Plastic Beach tonally sounds so different from Demon Days, but the patches, like there are similar patches, and again, I don't know anything about patches, but like I can hear sounds where I'm like, well,
Right.
that's Gorillaz. Like,
Exactly.
I've
And
heard
those
this
kind
on
of
other Gorillaz
permeate,
albums.
even if the song itself is entirely different.
Right.
And, you know, you you say, rightly so, that you can't really, if you say describe Gorillaz, you really can't. I would have trouble describing a singular Gorillaz song. I mean, it's just its own thing. It's
Yeah.
almost its own genre.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, you've got that like that melodica through the that first album, and you hear it permeate here and there throughout the rest of the albums, which is that little, it's like that little piano that you blow into.
The hooter. Yeah.
It's a weird kind of sound, but it goes throughout. I would have to go back and look, but I feel like I've heard it in pretty much all their albums.
I think so too. I think there's like I for some reason I just classify it as a Casio. Like I don't know what it is, but for some reason it feels Casio to me. So
It sort of sounds that way, but it's interesting because it is like it's not an electronic instrument. You just blow into this little plastic piano thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, lots of weird sounds like that, and it's weird when you start to hear that. Like I remember hearing Clinic for the first time, and they use that melodica a lot, and I was like, that's the Gorillaz sound. Like they're using the Gorillaz thing. It's weird how that happens.
And so Plastic Beach, you know, #2 debut on the UK charts. It was also #2 on the US Billboard chart. Like this is another smash, and now the guy is spanning 3 decades of relevancy, which, not to draw tethers, but Oasis didn't. You know, like the Gallaghers had fallen apart or were in the process of falling apart at this point. I think they made it to 2014 technically, but like they didn't have hits like at that point, you know, like Damon has continued to carry the torch, and I skipped The Fall, and I think part of it is because it came very quickly on the heels of Plastic Beach, and it was like a fan club release or something. Like I feel like it didn't get, I still do, but I was still like heavily buying physical product at that point. And I feel like there was something weird with The Fall. Are you familiar with The Fall at all?
I didn't even know about it until like a few years ago. I didn't even know it. I missed it entirely. I didn't even know that it existed. I knew about Humans and the Now, but I didn't even know. It's probably only been a few years since I even knew of the existence of that album.
Yeah, it's weird. The way that they rolled it out, like I remember hearing something about it where like he was going to put out some songs that he recorded on an iPad, and I was like, all right, I don't know what that sounds like. I like Plastic Beach. And so I just kind of I ignored it. I don't know when it got a physical release, but I remember it getting some sort of digital distribution, and I just wasn't interested in it. I haven't even gone back to it. It's like a gap in my Damonography.
Yeah,
I don't know the album much, so sorry, we're not going to be able to talk too eloquently about The Fall. But I definitely want to go listen to it. It seems like it'd be up my alley now, like looking back on it, something like Stripped that he just sat and did himself, like day by day.
Yeah, and I wonder how
much
it maybe would have done better if it wasn't the same year that Plastic Beach came out. Like he did a lot of it on tour while he was on tour. But the Now is the same way. The majority of that album was written and a lot of it, from what I understand, was recorded touring America. And, you know, you can we're skipping ahead a little bit talking about the Now, but you can like hear it. It's like, okay, he wrote this driving around.
There's Idaho and Kansas. Yeah. Like that Idaho song is so good.
It's super good, but that was its own thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So The Fall coming out the same year, it almost like it's kind of cannibalized itself, where it's like, you know, we talked about Stevie Wonder doing that and being nominated for awards for both albums, but it's like that doesn't really happen anymore.
Right. Except so the Now is that similar thing to Humans, like it's only a year later, and in some ways the Now is the Majora's Mask to the Humans Ocarina of Time. And so in looking at that, I'm like, is The Fall the Majora's Mask to Plastic Beach's Ocarina of Time? Because if it is, it's probably pretty great. So I definitely got a flag that I need to dig back into that.
Yeah.
But there's this moment off of Plastic Beach. There's a live TV performance, and I don't know if you can even find it now because it was on the internet for a while and it got taken down. But it was on Jules Holland, which is a big UK show. I believe it was Jules Holland. And they had the whole thing. Like they got the whole group together, because at this point you can't tour Gorillaz as it is on the album because there's so many parts. You're not bringing De La Soul out on the road to do 2 songs. You know, it's just not going to happen.
Typically not, no.
Yeah. And you're not touring with a 70-year-old soul singer either. And, you know, but I remember seeing, like, loving Stylo and seeing this video of Damon Albarn in a captain's cap. He's wearing like a sailor's cap, and Mos Def has a megaphone, like what a cop has,
right?
And Bobby Womack is up there just singing his butt off, and he's got
even more so than on the album.
Yeah,
I think I've seen what you're talking, and I think
I posted it in the Discord ages ago, like maybe even before we started this podcast.
I feel like I saw it recently.
Okay. It gets taken off of the internet because it's from a TV show. It's kind of like Jimmy Fallon, where those things are hard to find sometimes. But if you can find it, it is such a great performance. And you have this entire orchestral group, this entire this orchestra behind him. And Damon looks so happy. Yeah. He looks like the ringleader from the mad circus of his design, and they are in a vibe, and he's got the Clash on stage with Mos Def and an orchestra and Bobby Womack and De La Soul, and you're like, what the heck? But it's interesting because I remember that is such a huge video for me, and this huge moment of cementing my fandom of who Damon Albarn is.
Yeah.
And then I see this interview piece with Jamie Hewlett saying that that's kind of the moment when he was like, I don't know if I can do Gorillaz anymore. Because Gorillaz, remember when we were talking when they first toured,
right?
The band was behind a sheet and the screen was the band.
Right.
And they were orchestrating this virtual thing. And now Gorillaz has turned into the vehicle of the eclectic genius of Damon Albarn's music tastes and his collaboration and his versatility. And it's not the visual. It's not the band.
It's not a cartoon band anymore.
It's not the
really.
story.
Right.
Yeah. It's Damon's show. And I think that and again, you don't know how much is media spin and whatever. But there is a hiatus that follows all of this, right? And you can see in that era, there's not a whole lot of amplifying the characters and the band members.
Right.
It does take a backseat to what Damon is doing musically.
I mean, I wonder, after so many years, though, it's like, how long can you keep the cartoon going? You know what I mean? There might be something to that.
Yeah. Well, and I always wonder that about like any sort of animated show where I'm like, man, how are you still drawing SpongeBob, dude? Like, that is a lot of SpongeBob to
Isn't
draw.
The Simpsons still going?
Yeah, Simpsons is still going, and South Park too. And I'm like, I don't know how you keep doing that. And to do that for what? Like, it's one thing if Comedy Central is writing you a big check and says, we need another season of South Park, please. Like, this is, are we drawing stuff for the tour? Are we drawing stuff for a music video? Or like, what's the vision here? How are we curating this? And
Right.
Again, I'm speculating from what I've seen and what I recall is the vision was lost there. The intentionality of the visual component might have fallen by the wayside there. And so, like, how can the visual artist manifest something when it's not cohesive with what's being presented orally?
Yeah.
And so he goes off. Gorillaz goes on hiatus. Blur reunites. They go and they perform, or they're supposed to perform, at this. I think it's a Japanese festival. They get back together for this reunion performance.
This was in 2008? Are we going? Because they reunited. I think we kind of maybe skipped over that a little bit because we were so excited to get to Plastic Beach.
Yeah.
Blur had a very brief reunion in 2008.
Okay.
And they played like a festival show and they played some other shows, but that was it. They didn't like start recording or anything like that.
Yeah, no. So
Okay.
What happens though is that I think there was supposed to be something in Japan, and I think there was a festival or something, but basically the band winds up in either like Hong Kong or Japan, and they're there with the intention to perform a tour and a festival, like a reunion thing, and it all falls apart. And so they're all just sitting there. They're all just in the area. They're not leaving. They don't know what's going on. And so they decide to sit down and make some music.
Yeah, write
and
some
so
songs.
over the course of a few days, they write some stuff, and then they leave, you know? They don't really think about it much, but Graham is toying with it, you know, like they're on good enough terms, and it was sort of an organic thing that's happening there. But Damon goes off to write and finish up his solo album. And he's also, at that point, he's done the Rocket Juice in the Moon,
Right.
which is his other side project with Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers, and again with Tony Allen,
again.
who he collaborated with for Good, the Bad, and the Queen. And he's also working on the music for a musical called Wonderland, which is based on the Alice in Wonderland Through the Looking Glass book. So the guy's busy. So like this, to him at this point, Blur's almost just a stopover, you know?
Right.
Like, I think it was getting together with these guys. This felt really good. Like, let's figure this out. And they walked away from it. Graham tools with this a bunch, and he actually brings the other guys in, I believe, and like finishes up parts of this to make it whole, and then goes back to Damon and says like, hey, I've got this thing from what we made and we kind of dialed it in a bit. How do you feel about this? And I believe Damon digs it and goes back to Hong Kong to get inspiration to get to write the lyrics. Like,
because of course you have to do that.
Yeah. Like he is like, there was something about in an interview where he was saying like, it felt like the moment had passed. Like we got together, we wrote these songs because we were all stuck in Hong Kong and it was very organic, but it didn't get finished at that time. And so he was like, I don't know if I can finish this when now we're a year removed or 2 years removed even at that point. And so he goes back to Hong Kong. He gets the inspiration to kind of tether himself to this music, and he writes the Magic Whip, or writes the lyrics for what would be released as the Magic Whip. And the band goes out on tour. They put the album out. It's a good album.
Yeah.
You know, it's just not, it's not, I don't know what Blur is now.
Right. Right.
Like, I don't know what it can be, you know?
It's still, I mean, it sounds like Blur. It's a good listen.
Yeah.
It's just not like particularly memorable, I would say.
Right.
But good tracks on there for sure. And, you know, you're, as a Blur fan, you're happy that they did it.
Yeah. Now, I want to touch on Everyday Robots. I don't know what your history is with that album at all.
I listened to it. It's something that came out that kind of was on the radar, and sort of similar to the Magic Whip. I was just like, oh, this is good. Listen to it a few times. It's in the rotation for a while. And then it's just kind of like none of it really like stuck as like a long-term favorite. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's how it was for me. It's good though. It's quite good.
So I felt that way about Everyday Robots, and I still do. There's definitely stuff about it that sticks and some that doesn't. I don't want to jump ahead too much, but his other solo album now and then this one, there's something very unique about Damon Albarn just in general, I think.
Yes.
And this is like almost a culminative point ultimately. But again, when I'm going to Chris Martin of Coldplay, right, there's an arrogance there. There's an earnest arrogance. There's a confidence that feels like the guy knows how hot he is, you know? When I listen to Tom York, and again, I'm not the Radiohead guy, so please feel free, but the guy just feels like he smelled his own fart and he loved it, you know? Like, I'm just like, there's something about the way that Tom York is where he's hopped on his own stuff. And again, as an artist, I think you have to be in some ways, you know? Like, I'm here for it. There's definitely a swagger to Damon, but there's a vulnerability within that.
Yeah,
you
for
know?
sure.
And there's also this kind of dancing, like he misspeaks all the time. The guy doesn't have a great filter, but I think he's genuinely a good dude who's he's just opinionated.
Yeah.
He is guarded. He's
not and he
the
gets
guy.
Nervous.
He definitely gets nervous. He's not the guy who overshares. There's something. There's an onion to peel in almost everything, but I'd say less in Blur, more so in Gorillaz, and definitely in his solo albums, because his solo albums almost hits it right on the head.
Yeah.
But you can listen to the Gorillaz stuff and just vibe. You can just go with it and whatever, or you can start to pick into what he's writing and why he's writing it and find little things about who Damon Albarn is and how he feels and what he's experienced.
Right.
Obviously, we talked about like the stuff on 13. The guy can write a bleeding breakup song.
Absolutely.
But there's still something like you don't feel like you really know him entirely. And when I go back and listen to Everyday Robots, there's a lot of social commentary in there. It's funny, I didn't realize there's a song called Mr. Tembo on here where I heard this album before I had my kid. And I remember hearing that song and like kind of strumming along to it on my guitar. And I was like, I'm going to play this for my kid. Like, this is just like a fun little song that you can play for your kid. And he wrote it about an elephant that he met in Africa. And he wrote it for his daughter, apparently. I didn't know that,
wow.
you know, like he wrote this like fun little thing. And I'm listening to this and I'm like, yeah, this is a song that I would sing to my kid. And I did. But there's definitely like, there's a lot more exposure to who it peels back who Damon is a little bit more on this than I think anywhere else. It's there to find it if you want to, I'd say, you know. The album is not consistent. I don't think it's consistent. I think it has peaks and valleys. I feel like certain things are almost an afterthought. Like I think that this feels like there's weird little ruminations here, but some stuff it doesn't seem fully cohesive. And again, I think that this is part of the fact that he needs other people to feed off of and work with. He works best.
It seems that way,
in
right?
That. Yeah, he works best in a collaborative situation because I think his brain is buzzing. I think this guy has so much running through it and so many things he wants to get out. And if he's working with a certain person or a certain group, then they can kind of give that guidance. They can provide a direction. And I feel like Everyday Robots goes a little bit all over the place.
Yeah, I think that's a really insightful commentary on it. It makes a lot of sense. And being a musician myself, I can definitely see that. I'm not at all claiming to have anywhere near the level of constant ideas and creative energy that he has, but you know, I sit down and I write songs, and that's one of the things that I've committed to do this year. I bought like a thick notebook and wrote songs 2023 on it, and just, you know, I'm going to write more songs this year. And it's just not even like a, you know, resolution, because that's not really my thing, but it's just something I decided that is important to me, that kind of fell by the wayside for a while. And so as someone that writes songs, I get that. It's so much easier, at least for me, to write, you know, with somebody else. Yeah. Because it's more brains firing at the same time. It's more ideas. And if you're open to it and not gonna be territorial about your ideas, or you know, prideful enough to want your idea to stick or be the primary thing, then it just it's so much easier. And I have so many half-baked song ideas and half-baked recordings and things like that they're never going to go anywhere because there's not much there. And I can definitely see how much fun, I can imagine how fun it would be to like have a bunch of just like a grab bag full of half-baked, semi-recorded ideas, and bring in somebody like Snoop Dogg or Thundercat or Bobby Womack, and just be like, hey, I wrote this thing, like, what do you think? Let's do something with it. And then just like see what happens. Yeah. That sounds amazing.
Yeah. And I think he then goes and leans into that heavily because Humans is is really all over the place in a great way.
Yeah, it's off the rails.
It is. It's taking everything that we've talked about now, and if you've never spent time with humans, like, hop in your car and just throw it on.
It's bonkers.
I don't. This is not. And again, I have ways of kind of labeling things for my own listening habits. This is not one that I would buy on vinyl. Like, this is not something that I'm just going to like sit there and experience. This is punch you in the face and then like hit you from the other side. And it is, but it is all over the place in the best way. And the features on this, I mean, putting Mavis Staples and Pusha T on the same song, and that song is a jam. Like, Andromeda, the song with Grace Jones is great. The Popcorn song, I put on Strobe Light. Like, if my daughter's like, let's have a dance party, Strobe Light goes on. There's so much happening on this, and at this point, Damon and Noel Gallagher are good. Like, Noel's on this album. So there's almost like the zenith, as far as we can see, or at least a peak of what collaborative Gorillaz can be.
It's crazy
with this project, and I feel like I'm going to contradict myself because as much as Humans is fun, the Now has become one of my favorite Gorillaz albums, which doesn't have a lot of features. So
no. Snoop is back though.
Snoop's back. George Benson, my smooth jazz boy, kicks it off with him, which
it's a wonderful
maybe
album.
Yeah, maybe that's why I lean into it a little bit. But there's, I think it's maybe because I like kind of light synth pop and that kind of stuff, like these like fun kind of poppy synth melodies that are just like so listenable. I don't own this on vinyl, and I want to. You know, like this is one that I'm keeping my eyes open for to try to pick up, because it feels like one that you can just throw on and listen cover to cover. Because I have.
Yes, it is a good vinyl listen. I bought it for a friend of mine a couple years ago, and it's a great vinyl listen. Just because it's a chill Gorillaz album, and sometimes that's what you need. I love it. I think it's fantastic. It's hard to, it's like hard to compare to Plastic Beach and Demon Days, because it's just such a different, I hate using the word vibe so much, and I don't know how I got started saying it, but it is. Yeah. It's just a different overall feeling. Yeah. And sometimes you need that, and sometimes you need Plastic Beach. And sometimes you're in a dark mood and you need Demon Days. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So we're getting pretty close to current day, but not quite there yet. They do kind of an experiment with Song Machine, because, and I think the general idea is that, you know, with every Gorillaz album, there's like an overarching concept, whether it's all of these songs were written on tour, all of these songs are in the context of, you know, living on this weird island made of plastic, and we're all just kind of having a party watching the apocalypse around us. But the idea behind Song Machine is, okay, let's just write a song for the sake of the song and not try to fit it into the context of this album concept.
I mean, I think part of it also, just to go back to Humans real quick, because I do think that Humans leads into this format. Humans, the way that he constructed that, he wasn't in the studio, to my knowledge, with most, if not any of those collaborators, with most of those collaborators. And so it's funny. So Humans came out in 2017, but when he was in touch and working on the album, 2 years prior, 2015, late 2014 into 2015. And he was talking to these collaborators, and he was trying to work through with them what he was looking for. He's sending the music along for Pusha T to do his verse, and Vince Staples to do his verse, and whatever. And apparently Grace Jones sent him 4 hours worth of material. Like, she just freestyled over the music for 4 hours and said, "Here you go, figure it out." And like, and he did. They chopped it up, dude. They were like, I mean, go back and listen to that. Listen to Charger now. Like,
I don't remember.
Knowing that, knowing
God.
that like they basically sat there with 4 hours
That's a production nightmare.
her just like freestyling over it, and they just chopped up stuff. And
That's
they were
insane.
They said it was basically just like having a bunch of puzzle pieces and being like, okay, this piece can go here and this can go there, and there we go, we have a song.
Nuts.
But it's kind of awesome. I mean, like, who makes a song like that? Yeah,
That's great.
but I believe for Song Machine, they were doing stuff either in the studio together, or they were like in adjacent studios. It was definitely a closer kind of collaborative thing, or it was intended to be so. And then COVID happens,
Right.
and so things kind of don't materialize the way that they want to.
Right.
But when you look at the way, like, what's happening here, it's Robert Smith from The Cure, it's Beck, it's Elton John. Like, this is the stuff. I mean, and granted, it's Schoolboy Q and St. Vincent and Peter Hook and like Slow Tie, like it still spans the gamut of genres and styles, but it's pretty ambitious and pretty all over the place. But each song has its own video, like music video.
Yes.
And again, going back to what we were saying with Jamie, like, I think that this is the collaborative consensus that they come to, which is like, yes, this can be the vehicle for collaborative expression and exploration, but we need to know what that looks like. Like, how do we make that look like something? And so this way, there's at least visual direction that goes along with the project.
Right.
Again, my interpretation of the situation, but I'm just looking at this and I'm like, this seems like the perfect compromise for what you can do to take Gorillaz to the next level. It was never, they put it out as an album. It was never intended to be so. It was just supposed to be a web series. It's really cool. I've seen
There's a
handful
lot
of
on
these.
this album too. There's a lot of music.
Yeah. The St. Vincent song is dope. The Schoolboy Q song is awesome. I haven't seen all the videos for these though. And it's claimed it's marked as season 1, so it leaves the door open for like, this could be what Gorillaz is going forward. Like, this could be, although I know we're getting one in a few days, right? So
Ooh, it's getting
we'll
close.
See. Yeah. so I
close.
guess we'll see. But yeah, it's a cool concept, and it seems like the right kind of move for what they're always looking to see what Gorillaz can become next.
I think they'll probably do it again. I mean, there's a lot of season 1s of things that never had a season 2, so you never know. But it's too cool of a concept to just leave it as a one-off. But it's Gorillaz. It's kind of, they're unpredictable. And Damon himself is kind of unpredictable. So that's always something that could have just been an idea, and he did it, and move on to do something else. We might not be able to imagine what it is.
Yeah. Now, this is probably going to be where we leave Gorillaz, because everything else is speculative on where we're going next for that project. But I do kind of have a question for you, and it stems from something that came out around this time, which was Damon said in an interview at one point, I'm trying to remember exactly how it came up, but they asked him about collaborative situations that haven't worked out, I think it was. And he brought up Adele, and I guess the way that it played out, and he prefaces, and this is why I'm bringing this up, he prefaces it by saying that she or her team had reached out to him and brought him in to work on something. And I think this is dating back to like 25 or even 21. Like it's years back now. It's not for the most recent album.
Yeah.
And he says like, I'm not a producer, you know? So like,
right.
You could bring me in, but like for what, you know? And it apparently didn't go so well. Who knows what actually happened? You know, Adele walked away saying some stuff. I mean, whatever was created has never been released and probably won't. She walked away from it seemingly disappointed. He walked away from it kind of being like, yeah, I told you I wasn't a producer, you know. Or like,
what did you expect?
He kind of walked away from it being like, well, that was a waste of time. I don't know. Like, I can't put words in the guy's mouth. But like, it did put it in my head because I looked around and you don't see Damon on too many other things. So he's a collaborator in his space, right? And he's not a producer. He's not putting his fingerprints on other people's projects.
Yeah, he doesn't really do that.
And maybe I'm bringing in my own experience here or my own fandoms here, but it feels akin to what I see and appreciate with Tyler, where Tyler the creator works in his space and people come to his projects and operate in his world. You don't see Tyler featuring on too many other people's things unless they're in like his tight collaborative group, which you do see with Damon. Damon, we were just saying, Damon's on a De La Soul album.
Yes.
He's popped up with Tony on other things. Like if you're in that inner circle and you're putting something out, then Damon will probably join you. But he's not jumping on other people's records, and Tyler's not jumping on other people's records, and they're both very eclectic in how they kind of take their direction and each song. And I wonder, like, I can't think of too many other artists that behave that way, that are like, you know, I think of Jack Antonoff, who had his bands and then he's a producer and he still has his bands. And usually it goes that way. Usually you have your Dan Wilsons of Semisonic, who goes off and becomes a songwriter and he writes songs for other people and then he has a side project. Damon is his own island.
Yeah.
He's his own kind of institution. I don't know if there's anybody else that you can think of, but it seems almost wholly unique in this as a creator that he has established and like he's got an orbit and he's established himself and who he is, and you either go and get in the flow and create, or you don't, and that's okay too, you know?
Yeah, he's a bit of an island guy, I guess. Yeah. There's not really anyone quite like him. You know,
Cracker Island or Plastic Beach.
You got Cracker Island, you got Plastic Beach, you got, I mean, he was granted Icelandic citizenship. Yeah. So now he is an island nation citizen. So it's like he likes, I remember reading that he likes Iceland because at least like in the winter months, you know, it's dark most of the time due to its, you know, proximity to the North Pole. It's that kind of situation where it's dark for like 19 to 20 hours a day, and it's like that's a great environment for songwriting.
Yeah, probably, right?
So he's just that kind of guy. He likes to create, and he knows what he likes to do, and apparently likes to create with others, and we're happy to to be along for the ride, basically, and
Yeah.
never be 100% sure exactly what is coming next.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, it does look like he was quoted as saying that season 2 of Song Machine will come sooner than we think.
Oh, okay.
So
That's
I
great.
did catch that
Okay.
as I was scrolling through here.
So then I would like to quickly just touch on his latest solo album. When it came out, it was released in 2021.
Yep.
And when it came out, I listened to a song or two. I didn't have any context. I don't know. It didn't pull me. It didn't hit. I didn't understand it, and I walked away from it. And I've gone back to it in preparation for this podcast. In some ways, I've gone back to it recently, and then again, just very recently. And I actually I realized that maybe I was doing it wrong. So he got commissioned by this French arts organization to create whatever he wanted to, basically. I think it needed to be orchestrated. It needed to be something that was orchestrated. He couldn't just make a singer-songwriter solo album. Not that he would. But he could do it about whatever he wants, however he wants. And he decides that he wants to make it about Iceland, about looking out his window and what he sees on the beaches and in the water and the rocks and the mountains and the sky. And he starts bringing in these performers, these string and brass, and he's doing this whole thing. And he flies them all in with with this grant money, and they all come to his house, and they all sit there and they get assigned different responsibilities. So one of them is in charge of representing the clouds and what they see, and the other one's supposed to represent the rain and the waves, and they're all just freestyle trying to create these songs. And then the project has to get shut down because of COVID, and so but he's got this body of work and he's got these recordings, and so he brings in some of his kind of close confidants to finish this up, and the end result isn't a wholly orchestral work, because it can't be, because it was kind of cut short by it couldn't be finished entirely.
Right.
But it's also not a normal Damon album. It's definitely not a Gorillaz album.
No.
And so when I tried to listen to it sort of ad hoc piecemeal, it definitely didn't work. But just today, I drove myself to the ocean just to experiment, I guess, because I could feel the pull of it. He's dealing and he's talking about stuff, and what you were just saying about how sort of semi-reclusive he gets, and how he almost probably enjoys the hermit life as much as a public performer can be. He also has this I'm going to just sit in the darkness in Iceland. Right. And this theme of us being particles, or humans being particles, keeps coming up. Sorry, I'm getting really deep on you here, but it's a Damon Albarn conversation.
This is the most recent Damon Albarn thing we have to go by. So
yeah, he's talking about this, and it so gels with how I feel, especially when I'm standing against a cliff or up against a vast body of water or whatever it is, where you just feel so small.
Yeah.
And he's also coping. So Tony Allen, his collaborator, the drummer that he worked with, passed away in 2020.
Right.
Bobby Womack passed away a few years before that. He's had a lot of loss, a lot of collaborative loss. And that shows up here a bunch. And so there's a starkness, there's a vulnerability here. And when we talk about sonic landscapes, this is it in many ways. Like this album is still growing on me. I feel like I need more time with it. There's stuff on there where he's talking about facing fears. There's stuff talking about raising kids and like, there's just, every time something comes up on this album, it ticks a box for me.
Wow.
It's weird. It's weird to feel like, running up alongside what Damon is experiencing and seeing and feeling at the moment and being like, okay, yeah, I can actually get there a little bit.
Right.
Because I'm not used to that with Gorillaz.
No. I don't know.
Gorillaz, I'm like, dude, what are you smoking? Oh my God. Right.
Right.
But I can't help but feel like I'm getting a peek inside of what has always and is growingly there inside of Damon Albarn, and
Yeah,
I'm like,
that's cool.
Oh, I can relate to that. Like, it's his most relatable thing for me that I've ever experienced. There's still the social commentary. There's still the abstract on the abstract. There's a lot of depth, but this one, like, there's a special vinyl package that I just saw that's like 32-page art book or whatever. And dude, I got to go to Iceland anyway. Like, I've always kind of wanted to go. My wife's been killing me. My wife's been dying to go. So it's going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, I turned to her today and I was like, so you still want to go to Iceland? Like, 'cause maybe we can do
That's
that.
awesome.
So I would, again, it seems like the kind of thing that maybe you need to be in the right headspace for. Like, I wouldn't just go like jaunting down the street to pick up a donut and listen to this album,
Yeah, and possibly need to be in the right geographical space because
maybe, yeah.
it hasn't struck me like that yet. So,
but I bet you could go wander into the woods or something like that and have something. For me, it's the starkness. It's just not feeling like you as a human are in charge of everything. There's this commentary on getting pulled away by currents and feeling like an alien to a bird, and it's just there's certain things going on there where I'm like, I have felt that way. Like, I've had a fox walk out on me on a trail and look at me like, dude, you don't belong here. Like, he looked at me like, why are you even here? And I stood and I waited until he walked away because I'm like, you're right, I'm not supposed to be here.
Right.
Like, this is your spot.
Right.
Like, I don't know why I'm here. Yeah. So I bet you could have that in other places. Not on the side of a highway, but like probably in other places.
I need to do that for sure.
Yeah, at some point. Yeah. I just as an aside, like I'm not one for resolutions either, but like taking long mental health walks that remove me from society a little bit is high on my list this year of like, I need to make sure I'm doing that.
Yeah.
'Cause it's big time. Like, huge help. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's so cool that you have something like that helps.
Yeah.
And
now I got an album to listen to, do with it. Yeah.
That's good. That's part of it. It's part of the journey. That's part of why
man.
we do what we do. It's amazing.
That's right.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
I had one more thought / question as I think we wrap up here, unless you've got something you wanted to hit. But
no, just other than looking forward to Cracker Island.
Yeah. So I kind of touched on it before, but you had told me at one point that your daughter, like, you had seen that she made a playlist and she's requested listening to the Gorillaz, but she, like, just on her own independently made a playlist of Gorillaz music, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure she was exposed to that partly by you.
Right. But
I wonder, and again, he is 50 something. Like, he's an older dude. He's not the youngest gun. But that sort of, there's an authenticity. Again, going back to like the arrogance of a Chris Martin or a Tom York. There's something authentic about everything he does, whether it's a calypso thing or a Moroccan thing, or if he's channeling the Middle East, or wherever Damon's head is at with his collaborators and his compositions. It's always authentic, and I feel like kids, quote unquote, feel like the streaming generation can smell that. I might be off. I feel like there's so much put on authenticity now for the good, and I feel like we have a generation of music fans who have more eclectic tastes because they're exposed to everything and can be exposed to it on TikTok and YouTube, and everything's at their fingertips. Is kids finding music where I'm like, I don't know how you ever heard this random sub pop release from '89 and you're like 12, like,
right.
Who are you?
Right.
but they are, and then they're forming bands, and I wonder if there's something to the longevity of Gorillaz even going forward, which is why I figured this is a good endpoint, that continues to gel with what people who are consuming music now, as a younger people who are consuming music now, are looking for, which is eclectic authenticity. That's like kind of where I've come to as who Damon Albarn is eclectically authentic. I think it speaks. I think your daughter isn't listening to that because dad played some cool tunes, you know?
No,
like,
she thinks the music that I listen to is cringy.
Yeah. So why does Gorillaz work, right?
I don't know. It's a good question.
I think I do. I think it's because there's like, it's all over the place and she can jump around and listen to the stuff that she wants to. I think it's relevant and it's eclectic. And I think that that's what kids like. I think that that's what people who are looking to consume music are looking for. So
that's a good point. There's also something to say about, I'm going to see if I can articulate this, but you know, it's gotten to the point where it's not even so much authenticity, but it's the whole 9 layers of meme internet culture where, like, you know, they're being fake in an authentic way because it's referential to something else. And it's just, you know, 9 layers deep, and eventually it just all kind of becomes a cartoon. And like in Looney Tunes, there's gags in Looney Tunes that reference back to prior gags in other, you know, Looney Tunes episodes that you might not catch if you hadn't seen it. And it's all just part of the show. So there might be something to that as well, or maybe I'm just way overthinking it and you're on the nose here.
No, I think it's both, and I think you're right. You know, we talked a little bit about how Damon and Jamie formulated this group with that sort of taking the piss out of what was going on in MTV at the time. But I think at the same time, I'd be shocked if Damon didn't realize that, like, going from Blur to, if he was just putting out records as Damon Albarn, or even just like made up a name, you know, and like called himself Gorillaz, but it was just him, it wouldn't work. Like, no. it wouldn't have worked the way that it worked, I should say. I think the music still would have been great, but it would have fallen into the sub pocket of fandom and eclectic purveyors of whatever,
right?
As opposed to just immediately being palatable because it was a cartoon. Yeah. Immediately, the avatarism of it, It's genius. It's crazy that I know that it happens over in Japan and Korea, where they have these virtual idols, but it's crazy that no one's been able to do it. It's like that Weird Al conversation we had where it's like, there's a guy who figured out the formula and he put out 20 records on how to do it and no one else could do this. He's the only one who can do this, you know? And I'm looking at this and I'm like, Gorillaz is 20 years in now and no one else, there's nobody else who can step up to the plate and also do, like, why don't we have a Gorillaz collaborative tour with another virtual band? Why isn't this happening? Where's our new Gorillaz?
Because it's very, very, I think it's because it's
Come
very
on, Adam,
difficult
you gotta do it. Okay.
to have that purely authentic fakeness.
Yeah.
It's a cartoon. It's not real. These
tenuous.
characters don't exist.
Yeah.
But it's so real. Like, I don't know how else to put it. There's a layer of maybe it's just modern day puppetry where it's like, we're going to present this entire thing to you.
It is.
And we both know that it's fake and we're both kind of winking at each other.
Right.
But if you like peer into it, you can see us.
And the substance is there too. So it's like, here's this puppet show. You're in on it. You're enjoying it. Buy in, like, stay with the meta, but also the music slaps. So, like,
there you go. The
you're gonna
music
have a
has
good
to
time.
slap, otherwise it doesn't. The whole thing falls apart if the music doesn't slap.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There we
Wow.
go. We made it.
Yeah. Sorry, this is 2 hours, everybody. I really didn't feel like that. I'm sure it feels like that for you if you're listening, but for me, it did not.
If
feel
they've
like
made
2
it to this
hours,
point,
so.
they're in. They're all in.
Yeah.
If they're not hearing us talk right now, then they missed it. That's all. That sounds fine.
If anybody made it to this point and hasn't listened to some of these things, I mean, his discography is so great to dive into, and there's no one else like Damon Albarn. I hate that all of these comparisons to the Gallaghers, and I know that I brought up a bunch of other Brit rock artists through all of this, but like, there's no one like Damon Albarn, and he's awesome, and we're lucky that he continues to crank stuff out.
Yeah. You know what's going to be insanely fun but weirdly difficult is making the playlist for this episode.
Yeah. Man. It's going to be as eclectic as a Gorillaz album.
Yeah. Yep. And probably somehow even more so, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, we're just looking forward to Cracker Island. There's I think 4 songs off the album currently available, at least at the time of recording this.
We got some Blur reunion stuff cooking too, which again, the way that Magic Whip played out with them,
we'll see what
collaborating
happens.
because they were on a tour together, like, could happen again. They've expressed interest in writing new music together, so
we'll see what happens. Well, thank you for taking this long journey with us. I enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you, Liam, for coming along with me and for all of your input. Always just an incredible time. Thank you for listening to Retro Groove. We are part of the Retro Logic family of podcasts. You can find us on Discord, on the Retro Logic server. You can also find us and talk with us on Twitter at retrogroove_pod. And thank you so much for listening.